Good morning. Today is Friday, October 21st, 2021. Excuse me, 2022. This is the Urban Hope Refuge Morning Devotions. We are continuing our reading today from the 2022 Daily Bible Reading Guide published by the American Bible Society. For the month of October, we're reading under the theme God's Renewing Word of Peace and Justice. Today, we are reading from the book of Numbers, chapter 27, verses 1 through 11 in the New International Version. And I have to tell you before I begin reading, this is one of my favorite, most favorite passages of Scripture, and it deals with five daughters. The sub theme is Zelophehad's daughters. Verse 1. The daughters of Zelophehad, son of Hefer, the son of Gilead, the son of Machir, the son of Manasseh, belonged to the clans of Manasseh, son of Joseph. The names of the daughters were Mahlah, Noah, Haglah, Milcah, and Tirzah. They came forward and stood before Moses. Eleazar, the priest, the leaders, and the whole assembly at the entrance to the tent of meeting, and said, Our father died in the wilderness. He was not among Korah's followers who band together against the Lord, but he died for his own sin and left no sons. Why should our father's name disappear from his clan because he had no son? Give us property among our father's relatives. So Moses brought their case before the Lord, and the Lord said to him, What Zelophehad's daughters are saying is right. You must certainly give them property as an inheritance among their father's relatives and give their father's inheritance to them. Say to the Israelites, if a man dies and leaves no son, give his inheritance to his daughter. If he has no daughter, give his inheritance to his brothers. If he has no brothers, give his inheritance to the nearest relative in his clan, that he may possess it. This is to have the force of law for the Israelites, saith the Lord, commanded Moses. Well, this concludes our reading for today of Numbers 27, verses 1 through 11. Let me give you a little bit of background. In verses 1 through 4, like many societies, the Israelites had male leaders mostly. Men did important and powerful jobs in the society. When a man died, his land and property belonged to his son. Usually, a daughter did not receive her father's land and property after his death. That's what makes this passage of scripture so significant, because it actually, that law that God had Moses to give out of the requests that was made by Zelophehad's daughters, carries over into law and legality even today. As I stated, usually a daughter did not receive her father's land and property after his death. People expected the daughter to marry. Then she would share her husband's land. But until she married, the men in her family were responsible for her. Also, after a man died, the name of his family passed on to the male members of the family. So you can see in verse 1 that records Zelophehad's ancestors emphasize this. But Zelophehad had no sons to receive his property after his death. But listen, he had 5 brave daughters. And these daughters thought that this was unfair. I want you to take the time at your leisure to go back and read the entire 27th chapter of Romans, because you're going to see, oh, what a wonderful example that these 5 daughters were. Even for women today, they were appropriate in their behavior and in their actions. They were humble and they were godly. So they went to Moses and the other leaders to speak about this. And one of the things that you need to know is that the children of Israel were almost at the promised land. After all of these years of getting there, they were just about to cross over. And so a census was being taken, because over a 40-year period, a lot of people have died and a lot of people have been born. So they needed to count the number of people in each of the tribes, so when they got to the promised land, that there would be a sense of fairness in what was designated to each of the tribes. That's what the book of Numbers is all about. So these were brave women to do what they did, because they knew what was about to happen and that they were going to be left out because their father had no sons. He had 5 brave and courageous daughters. And in their society, the people expected women to obey all the customs. But these women knew that this particular custom was unfair. God's promise to give the promised land to the Israelites, listen to this, was both for men and women. He made the promise to both of them. Now, if you will recall, when the daughters went to speak to Moses, the priest and the other leaders, she made reference to an individual, Korah's descendants had a right to receive land. Korah was one of the priests who rose up against Moses and influenced hundreds of other priests to follow him. But the prophet came and said that the ground was going to open up and swallow every one of those people who were going against Moses and their descendants who were anywhere nearby that were a part of that plot against Moses. So Zelophehad's daughter made it very clear to Moses, my father was not a part of that movement, and we deserve our father's inheritance, our father's property, our father's land. We should be counted and given his inheritance when we cross over into the promised land. And if you want to read that detail of Korah, who led that movement against Moses, go to Numbers chapter 16. But Zelophehad's sin, as his daughter said, were his own sins, not that he joined any other group against Moses. So he had died in the desert as well. The daughters explained this to Moses, and they asked him to give some of their land to them. In verses 5 through 7, Moses realized that their request was very important because Moses wanted to be fair, he wanted to be just, and he wanted to be in the will of God. If he agreed to give some land to these women, the traditional rules about property would have to change. And Moses' decision with these women would affect the future generations to come. So in verses 8 through 11, God told Moses, you see, Moses knew it was so important that he went directly to God with their requests. And God told Moses to grant the women their requests. He said, the daughters of Zelophehad are right. Also, not only did God agree with Zelophehad's daughters, God also gave Moses new rules about the inheritance. And he had to do that, so that was not a favor for Zelophehad's daughters only. Why? Because God has no respect of persons. It was a law for all the Israelites. It protected the name of the family of a dead man who died without sons. It made sure that the property remained in the family, and this was very important. There was a relationship between each family's share of land and Israel's original covenant with God. Therefore, it would have been wrong for any family to lose their land, even if a man died without sons. What a God of justice we serve. What a God that keeps his promise. What a God that said, I will always be with you. And God does just what he said he would do. He is always with us if we are his people. And I am a testimony of the fact that he guides and he protects us. And you know, I'm excited because he used these 5 women to bring about these attributes, reaffirm these attributes of himself. Listen, this is God's renewing word of peace and an emphasis on justice. So now, pray your way through the day, walk with the King, and be a blessing.